We are live with high production values tonight. One of my great travel friends is joining us, Michael Novins from Manhattan, New York.
Good to see you. We've actually met in person several times. First time we're meeting online, but I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to this one because he did a ton of homework and suggested a theme of 10 animal experiences that I couldn't tip the hand other than the enticing intro. So first we're going to get to know you a little bit, and then we will put on some multimedia extravaganza as well. So
That sounds good.
who are you and what do you do? You're one of those elusive travelers that doesn't have a big online presence, but seems to know everyone, know everything, been everywhere.
Well, I haven't been everywhere, and I don't know everyone, but and I have really no online presence other than I joined Facebook a couple of years ago when there was one of my family members was ill, and I had a tough time talking to him by phone during my travels. So I really joined Facebook at that time just to keep him informed. So even for this online session now, I sort of had to gin up a website, and really what I did is I went to my cloud storage site on SmugMug and I just made public all my travel photos, kept private my private photos. So that was my attempt at a website for this session.
Right, and I think similar to me, I would say you're a methodical and thorough planner, and we corresponded a lot over your planning for Christmas and Cocos Keeling Islands, Australia. So people are always curious about how someone plans a complicated trip.
Right.
Let's take that example and learn your method.
So what I do generally is I look at the white space and figure out where I haven't been. And generally, at least for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been able to travel for extended periods during the summer, say through beginning of June towards either the end of September or October. And what I generally try to do is travel for say 3, 4, 5 weeks at a time, and then return to New York. So I'm really planning manageable, effectively month-long trips. So I'll look for different destinations, and I try to sort of move around the globe, not try to go to any continent, too frequently during the course of the year. So I try to move my trips around and find a location. So in 2018, now I had my eye on Christmas and Cocos Island for a while. I had hoped to be able to use Delta miles and book an elusive award ticket on Virgin Australia to make the triangle flight Perth, Cocos, Christmas, Perth, or the other way around. And I'd spoken to you about that a few times, and I was unable to use miles to successfully book that award ticket. So I ended up just paying for that ticket, and I knew I needed to be in Perth. So I started to play around, how can I get to Perth? And to get to Perth, you can go from New York either way, really. Perth is almost as far as you can be. I started playing around, looking at flights, and there was a pretty good Qatar Airways flight, New York to Jakarta. So that was very inexpensive at the time. It would give me a 2-day stopover in Doha and Qatar, which I used at that time to visit their UNESCO site, rented a car and drove up there. Then I was able to fly into Jakarta. And when I was in Jakarta, I sort of looked around and thought, where hadn't I been in Indonesia? And I had, for business many years ago, spent months in Jakarta. So I knew that city pretty well. It's not very interesting. So I wasn't looking to spend much time in Jakarta, and I decided to fly to Sumatra, which I know we'll get to later on, and then sort of travel around that part of the world, Sumatra, KL, Penang, Singapore, and then get down to Perth and do that triangle flight over the course of a week or so. And then to come back from Perth, I think, I don't know I don't recall how I got on from Perth, but it was probably also using an award ticket. So to answer your question, the idea is to sort of see where I haven't been, where is there a lot of UNESCO sites or maybe a natural wonder or a wildlife destination that I want to visit and sort of move around to different locations and then play around with miles. And if the miles don't work, figure out if there's a reasonable way to purchase a ticket.
And I believe you're a fan of the most traveled people list, though not necessarily to complete it.
Well, the list I'm a fan of and the website I'm a fan of. I think I joined Most Travel People back in 2006, and I don't know when it started, but probably not much before that because when I clicked on the URL, and Charles can
Uh-huh.
probably verify this, my number was 111. So based on what I
Mm.
thought I was, almost one of the top 100 people to join. Then, I played around with the 111 number. When you change the 111 to 1, it comes out to be Charles. When you change it to 2, 3, 4, 5, you get other high profile travelers. So I was pretty sure I was 111. No, I do like that list. I'm not as interested in some of maybe the rocks and remote atolls and reefs that
Mm-hmm.
other folks are, but everyone has their own interests. But that's not to say I haven't gone to some unusual places that I read about on Most Travel People. Redonda Island, the Secchio Island. I would not have known about those but for MTP. And really, for me, what was interesting about those places was not necessarily the destination, because there really wasn't that much to do there, but sort of
Mm.
figuring out how to get there, without chartering a helicopter, without something
Mm-hmm.
that was exorbitant, sort of a reasonable way to visit those destinations. And if you're creative and you spend time making phone calls and doing some research, you can figure all that stuff out. So no, I am a fan of MTP, and actually, one thing I use MTP for extensively. That's where I have keep all my travel notes. In the very
Mm-hmm.
beginning, I was going back and forth with Charles, and he asked me to put a couple of posts on, and that sort of grew. And I'm a
Mm-hmm.
completist. And once I knew I had a couple of posts, my idea was to have a post for every place I visited other than Cuba. So I didn't want to
Oh.
reveal in a public site when I was working
Yeah.
for a public company how and when I went to Cuba. So I still haven't posted on MTP, but I think there's a post for every place I've been: hotels, restaurants, how I got there, what I've done. Try to be very transparent.
You mentioned hotels, and as I know, you're not just booking the airport Marriott. So talk about your hotel interests and booking.
So my idea really is to stay in historic hotels. Now I will stay in an airport hotel, if I have a overnight or that's convenient, but that's really not my preference. So when I go someplace, the first thing I do, if it's a city, is I'll just Google historic hotel and then drop in the name of the destination and see what comes up. And you'll be surprised. You do find historic hotels. I was in Svalbard last year. You could find the historic hotel in Longyearbyen. You could find the historic hotel in Lahore. I mean, they exist. Not every place has a historic hotel. And in that case, I try to find more of maybe a 3 or 4 star hotel, a mid-level hotel. But that's my preference, is the historic hotels, and I've stayed in an awful lot of those. And then also at the same time, the same thing. I always Google historic restaurants and see if there's anything interesting that's been around for a while, and I make an effort to eat there. Basically around the world.
With all that experience, how would somebody starting out in historic hotels sort out the experience they're going to like, or the experience that's going to be more faulty towers?
Certainly are some faulty towers. I mean, I don't know if you stay, for example, in the Fairlawn in Calcutta. Really, is that the Olafson in Port-au-Prince sort of comes to mind. But really, for the most part, they are in very good shape. A lot of the owners do a good job maintaining them. And even there are some that have been taken over by international companies. The Marriott, for example. There's a
Mm-hmm.
hotel in Tbilisi that opened in, I think, the early 1900s that's now managed by Marriott. And that, I'm happy to stay there, even though it's a Marriott branded hotel. And they maintain them. But for the most part, they're in good shape. There are some around the world that have seen better days. There's a hotel in Addis Ababa. I think it's called the Etegu. I stayed there. I think I was probably one of the last people to stay there. I think the rooms were shut down because they didn't even meet Ethiopian standards. So it's very basic. But
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, especially in Europe, even throughout Africa, Middle East, Asia, the historic hotels are generally in good shape, and you're not going to have any issues with them.
Fantastic. And it's particularly India and Sri Lanka, I've noticed that these, I mean, these are just incredible places that accommodation across the board, I suppose, and in both countries is great value, but something about being in these palaces, being in these incredible places filled with character. Fantastic. Let's talk animal encounters. And when you first explained the idea, you undersold it, saying everything but the megafauna. But then, as you started explaining, I was fascinated with what you want to share. So, well, let us know the theme of this. We're going to take a tour of 10 animal wildlife encounters and kick it off from there, and we'll switch over to the photos and videos as well.
So the idea was I wasn't sure what to talk about, and initially when you and I connected, I was maybe reluctant. I was reluctant to be interviewed because I wasn't sure I had anything to talk about. But then I gave it a little bit of thought, and there has actually been some traffic on EPS. I don't recall the guy's name, but he put a thread up and he asked folks to put up wildlife photos, and it really received a lot of traffic and a lot of interest. So throughout the course of my travels, I made an effort to visit the best, what I think is sort of the best wildlife destinations. Now, I certainly haven't been to them all, but I've been to a lot. So I wanted to sort of go through and pick 10 things that maybe people wouldn't necessarily think about. Not the charismatic megafauna, the elephants, the giraffes, the lions, the tigers. And look, those are all amazing. And I really made an effort to see all those. I failed on tigers, but I've seen the others. But really on EPS, if someone's traveling and visiting wildlife destinations, they would have seen all of those animals already. So what I try to do is think of 10 animals that maybe are not on people's radar screen either because they're very unusual or maybe are sort of very niche appeal, or maybe even if someone knows about these animals may not realize how easy they are to visit independently without joining a group tour or without a multi-week expedition. Sort of had to do them as day trips, which is how I arranged all of these. So that was the thinking, and then I sort of went through my photos. And the idea, really, the order is just reverse chronological order. There's no rhyme or reason other than that into how they'll be presented. So
you haven't seen tigers, but coloring wise, we'll start with the tigers of the sky, I suppose, the monarch butterflies. So we'll cue it up. We'll see a couple of videos, and then Michael will let us know about that experience, and we'll do a rapid fire trip through these 10 experiences.
So let's see if you can pull up the video. Hey, there you go. So these are going to be a couple of videos and then one still photo of the most recent international trip that I made this year. It was in February over US President's Day weekend holiday to Michoacan and the state of Mexico to see the butterflies. So these should play not as smoothly as it does when sort of I'm looking at it on my phone or on my home computer, but it'll give you some flavor, hopefully. And Stefan, I think you're still there, right?
I am.
Okay, so maybe you play this one, and then we can put up the still photo. So it really gives you, well, it doesn't come really across as good as it does when you're wandering around there. Maybe you lost the still photo. So, all right.
Yeah.
I don't know where it went. In any event, so let's chat about the monarchs for a little bit, and maybe I'll start, and you can jump in when you have any questions. But this is a trip that I've made twice. I went in November 2004. That was back when I was trying to visit all of the states of Mexico. And back in 2004, I'm sure I had a lot to go. So what I was trying to do at the time was use long weekends to go to one or two Mexican states. So I decided over Thanksgiving in 2004 to head down to Michoacan to try to see the monarch butterflies. It was too early in the season, and there really weren't as many conveniently located hotels that could offer sort of one-stop shopping, a place to stay and provide the tours. I did find one hotel. It was very nice, but it was not as well located as the place I stayed recently. So that was more than 10 years ago. So this year I was sort of thinking, where did I want to go over the holiday weekend in February? And I hadn't been down to see the butterfly reserves in a while. November was a bit early, and we'll talk in a little while about the life cycle, because that's really what's the most amazing thing about the monarch butterflies. But since my first visit, a couple has opened a bed and breakfast, J&M Butterfly Resort, and I think I sent you the link, so feel free to post it in the comments. I don't have any relations with them. I don't have any affiliation with them. I don't get any kickback from anything you're going to post. But other than, I just want to, it was a very nice place to stay. and it is at the entrance of one of the butterfly reserves. So I flew down there, and we could talk sort of how I managed to get there independently, and what they arranged for me over the course of a weekend. But maybe I'll sort of stop there and let you ask any preliminary questions you may have, and then we can sort of get into how I got there and what I did and what I saw, and really talk more about the monarchs themselves, because that's really the most fascinating thing about it.
It strikes me as one experience that doesn't photograph as well as the feeling when you're there and surrounded by them. It seems like this might be a bit of the feeling like Jellyfish Lake of Palau, where you're just suddenly surrounded, and it's mesmerizing to be in the midst of that. So what is that feeling?
That's true to an extent, but I would say if anybody really wants to see the videos, and maybe they'll come across a little bit better than they're coming across now, if they go to my SmugMug site and then they go to my Mexico gallery, and everything's set up by states in Mexico. If you go to Michoacan or the state of Mexico, you can see the videos, and there are a lot there. So it does video well. It's hard to photograph because there are just so many. Um,
Mm-hmm.
really, the way it works is um, there are a dozen or so protected mountaintops where the butterflies spend the winter. I think 8 of them are within the UNESCO World Heritage Site. The monarch
Mm-hmm.
butterfly reserves. That's not the official name, but that's the idea. And out of those 8, tourists are allowed to visit 5. And then out of those 5, really there are 2 that you want to visit. The other 3, there were fewer butterflies. Maybe it's more difficult to reach. So there are two that you want to visit. One is called Cerro Pelon, and that's not the one on the screen. But Cerro Pelon is the one right by the J&M Butterfly bed and breakfast where I stayed. And the way
Mm-hmm.
Cerro Pelon works is it's very, very steep. So there are horses lined up, and everybody rents a horse. Now you don't need to be know how to ride a horse. Basically, the horses know where to go, and it's
Mm-hmm.
about an hour and a half up to a steep mountain. And when you get there, we got there, it was a little bit cool, so the butterflies were sleeping, and you spend a few hours there wandering around. And when they're in the trees, they're not very exciting. But when it warms up to a certain temperature, they all start to fly. So we didn't see many flying the first day until we started to come back down the mountain on horseback. And then we just caught a moment when the temperature must have hit the right temperature, and hundreds of thousands of monarchs burst out of the trees. And it was almost like a snowstorm of monarch butterflies all around you. I mean, everywhere, so loud that you can even hear their wings beating. And when you look at them in the trees, there are so many there that these are fir trees. The branches are covered orange, and they bend under the weight of the butterflies. So imagine how much a butterfly weighs in order to bend the branch of a fir tree. They're everywhere.
Wow.
So that's the first place that people visit. Then these videos are from the most popular reserve. It's called El Rosario. It's developed. There are souvenir stands. So Cerro Pelon is undeveloped. There are no souvenir stands. There's really nothing. There's a dirt path that the horses know how to follow to get up the mountain to the area where the butterflies have colonized. But El Rosario, there's a parking lot. There's souvenir stands. There's restaurant stalls. But when you get to the top, I don't know, maybe there's 100 million butterflies in this one colony. And there are paths that sort of traverse the borders of the colony, and a few places maybe cut inside it. But there are butterflies literally everywhere. This colony, as I said, 80, 90, 100 million butterflies. It really is, as far as wildlife spectacles, it really is one of the best. And the fact that, at least for folks in New York, where I am, that you can see this over a long weekend, really more people should take advantage. It is like the equivalent of seeing the Great Migration with the wildebeest and the zebras and the antelopes and the predators and the Serengeti. It really is that good.
All right, that's incredible. Well, we'll keep dashing through your tour. So let's talk about the next one, which is famous and, as I understand, getting harder and more expensive uh, to do in the future. So one of those that I think people ask, is it really worth it? And that
Well,
will
that's
be
why I included it, because I'm going to give a plan B for this animal that maybe will make it more attractive to some of the people on EPS who may be not less excited about group travel or crowded travel. So if you can sort of scroll to
Yep, you've got the Komodo dragon on the screen.
right. So there are two pictures. You could keep this one up
Mm-hmm.
for the next one. But so let me talk about this for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So these are Komodo, obviously Komodo dragons, but they're not on Komodo Island itself. So this generally works. The first time I visited the Komodo dragons was 1997, and at that time there was really no information online. I'm not even quite sure how I put it together. I was in Jakarta on business, and I just flew to the town is called Labuan Bajo. It's on the west coast of the island of Flores. And on that plane, I met a couple of travelers, and we agreed to sort of hire a fishing boat that would take us to Komodo Island. That's all we knew about. So in 1997, when we went there, there was a park headquarters. They let us sleep on a bench. There really wasn't any running water. It was very, very basic, but there were a lot of Komodo dragons at that time on Komodo Island itself. And you wandered around. There were, I don't know how many we saw, but at that time they had recently stopped feeding the dragons, so the dragons still congregated in the area where they had been fed. So there were a lot, and there were very few people. So fast forward to 2019, and I went to see the Komodo dragons last August, and I knew I didn't really want to go to Komodo Island. So Komodo Island National Park is several islands, three big ones. Komodo Island, obviously, which everybody knows about. There's an island called Palau Padar, which the dragons are now extinct. People go there really for the view. You climb to the top, and the view is really it's worth the climb, as good as views get. But then there's an island that's closer to Labuan Bajo. It's called Rinca, Rinca, and that's close enough that you could charter a fishing boat, which is what I did. So I went by myself with a captain and a crew member, and it's about an hour and a half from Labuan Bajo, which is the town where everybody stays. And you get to Rinca. There were very few tourists there. When I don't know, 5 or 6 at the most, and you can wander around pretty freely with a guide, and they take you everywhere. And there are dragons. I don't know. I was there for 2-3 hours. You saw dozens of Komodo dragons, like it was when I went to Komodo, 20 something years ago. So that's really, if I had one island to visit, I would recommend Rinca. I did go to Komodo the next day after I went to Rinca, just because I hadn't heard much about it, and it was miserable. There were too many people. There were souvenir stands. I think we saw 4 Komodo dragons, 2 sort of running away, and 2 just hanging out by the restaurant. So hardly a natural experience. It was really not worth it. So I get the point in showing these Komodo dragons here is to suggest to folks that if they're going to visit, there's an alternative. Rinca really is a great alternative, and there were a lot of dragons there, easy to see, and much closer to Labuan Bajo than Komodo Island.
Fantastic. And yeah, that crowded, canned experience, I feel like then I might as well just go to a zoo. So
the zoo, if you want to go to a zoo, I went on the same trip to the zoo in Surabaya in Eastern Java. That zoo is incredible for 2 reasons. One is they have huge compounds with Komodo dragons, and there are dozens of them there. Then they were also instrumental in rescuing the Bali starling, a really attractive white bird. There are very few on the island of Bali, but in the Surabaya Zoo, if you went there are dozens, and they're really the ones that are working hard to conserve them and release them back into the wild.
Surabaya doesn't get that much mention or attention from tourists. Tell us about Surabaya and your experience there.
So Surabaya, why did I go to Surabaya? Well, when you looked at Nomad Mania, which is another travel website, I had spent a lot of time in Java, but I had never been to Eastern Java, so that was sort of a missing place that I had been on Nomad Mania. And I'm like a lot of people. You see these lists, and they offer suggestions of interesting places to visit. So Surabaya is much better than I anticipated. It has a quarter, and almost like an Arab quarter, like a Medina, that you can wander around. That was really fascinating. An incredible fish market. It's also the place where they make the clove cigarettes. So if you spend time in Indonesia, I'm sure you'd recognize that scent. So the largest clove cigarette manufacturer is on Surabaya in a really attractive historic building that now has a cafe and a museum. So that was worth visiting. And then the zoo. The zoo really was much better than I expected with the Komodo dragons, with the Bali starling, and really Indonesia is really one of the best places for wildlife. You know, it sort of splits. Half the country has sort of what you would consider Asian animals, and then when you get to the what's called the Wallace line, that sort of divides the country in half, you get animals that are more Australian in nature. So Indonesia has a lot of animals to see, and the Surabaya Zoo really probably has the best collection of Indonesian animals in Indonesia. So Surabaya, it's worth the trip.
Fantastic. All right. Are we ready for one that are so ugly they're beautiful, maybe?
I'm sorry?
Are we ready for an animal that's maybe so ugly they're beautiful?
Let's scroll to the third animal. All right, so this is a walrus, and right, it's not the reason I posted it is because when I first started to travel and I made sort of a mental list of animals I wanted to see in the wild, the walrus was really near the top. And when I started doing my research in the 1990s about walruses, the two places where they gathered in large numbers were Wrangel Island, which is north of Russia, which is exceedingly difficult to visit, and it can't be visited on a day trip. You need a very lengthy cruise. Or there's an island in Bristol Bay off Australia called Round Island, which has a lot of walruses, but it requires camping and permits and a major undertaking, which I was just not willing to commit to.
And I interrupt. I looked at that last year, and I could only find one. But the permit was actually available. You know, it's a cheap permit, but the only one boat operator I could find that would potentially go there, and it was, gosh, what was it? It was something like 800 per person, not per boat. And I said, so if we have two people and it's the same ride, it's 1,600. And yes, I suggested,
yeah,
can we?
there are a few places around the world with that model, but so I looked into it. I was supposed to go to Alaska, or I guess I was scheduled to go to Alaska at the end of July this year, and I looked into it again, but it's logistically difficult. I'm sure if you really wanted to go and you had a group, you could put it together. But last summer, I was planning on sort of doing half of the Trans-Siberian Railroad from Chumen in sort of central Russia to Belgorod near the Ukraine border. And I was playing around with, how would I get there? And it was pretty easy to route from New York to Oslo, and then Oslo to Ekaterinburg, and then on to Chumen. And I figured if I was going to fly to Oslo, I hadn't been to Svalbard. I would deviate and spend a few days in Svalbard, and then I started looking around what there is to do in Svalbard, and I came across a company that offered day trips to what's effectively a sandbar, which you see in the picture, where walruses gather. Now, but the interesting about the walruses in Svalbard is they had been hunted for years. So really by the 1950s, they had basically gone locally extinct in Svalbard. By the 1950s, hunting was banned. So they've come back now. I think there are now thousands all throughout the archipelago. But where I went to see them, there were probably 4 or 5 dozen spread around this sandbar. They're really an easy way to see them. The company was called Better Moments. They offer what's called a walrus safari from Longyearbyen. They pick you up in the morning. They put you on a really nice boat. The boat takes, as I said, an hour and a half or so to get to the sandbar. You spend maybe an hour with the walruses. Then they crank up at the bottle of champagne with the wooden champagne glasses, and everyone has a toast to the walruses, and then gets back on the boat and leaves. But if you really wanted to see a walrus, this is probably the easiest way and least expensive way to see a walrus in the wild.
All right, and this next one I got wrong in my guess what it is. I was going to call it something else.
You were probably technically right. To scroll to the next picture, there are two, but so what this animal is, it's technically a zebra. So really, zebras are very interesting. Right now, there are 3 types of zebras in the world. I'll go real. So there's the plain zebra, Plains, which is the common zebra, and that's the zebra that everybody sees when you go to the Serengeti, the Masai Mara, Tasha, Okavango, Kruger. And these zebras, there are 800,000 or some of these zebras running around running around Africa. Then there are two other zebras, the gravy zebra, which there are fewer, and that lives sort of northern Kenya, and I've only seen those up in Samburu and then into southern Ethiopia. And then there's a mountain zebra that lives down in South Africa and Namibia, which I had never seen. It's smaller. It has sort of a dewlap on its neck, which is like that fold of skin you see on a cow. So, but until the 1870s, there was another kind of zebra called the quagga, Quagga, and it's sort of a zebra in the front and a horse in the rear. You know, striped up front, but lighter stripes, almost like a brown, and then a brown solid rear, and no stripes on the legs. So I had read about this animal, the quagga years ago, and there's a project going on in South Africa now called the Quagga Project, and what they realize is that the quagga really is, on a genetic basis, a subspecies of the plain zebra. So they figured if they went and they gathered up some plain zebras and bred them, selectively bred them, maybe they could create a look-alike to the quagga. Now, they don't call it a quagga, they call it a Rao quagga, which is named after Reinhold Rao, the guy whose idea this was. So they went to Etosha in the 1980s up in Namibia. They selected 9 zebras, and since that time they've been sort of reverse engineering a look-alike quagga. So I had read about that. I went to the website. I didn't even know it was open to the public. So last year, and we could talk about points and miles for a second, I was in Malabo in Equatorial Guinea. And I was looking to how can I leave Malabo? And there aren't a lot of flights. I had come via Sao Tome, so I didn't want to go back that way. And Ethiopian Airlines had, I don't know if it was a daily flight, but a frequent flight from Malabo to Addis. And it was about 17,500 miles on United from Malabo to Addis. And then when we start playing around, not only was it 17,500 miles from Malabo to Addis, but it was the same number of miles from Malabo to anywhere in South Africa. I'm sorry, anywhere in Africa. So I always had in the back of my mind that I wanted to get back to Cape Town and try to see the quaggas. So I booked an award ticket from Malabo to Cape Town on Ethiopian Airlines, and I got in touch with the folks who run the Quagga Project. Now, they don't really get a lot of visitors, but, you know, I talked to them and I had some correspondence with them. I actually met them for dinner when I was in Cape Town, and, you know, they can tell I was very interested, and so the next day they set up a tour for me, and they arranged everything, you know, private driver, guided safaris, all meals, all free for me, because I guess I was relatively well informed, and plus they don't get anybody that's interested. The only other American tourist who had ever visited, this is the breeding stock, who had ever visited this area was Michael Crichton, you know, the author of Jurassic Park 10 years ago. Not, you know, so it was rare company, but that was only because I reached out to them. So I think they would probably make it available to anybody if anybody had written to them. So where they've gotten to now is they can control what they call the stripiness, how striped a zebra is, but they're having a bit more difficult time getting a very strong brown rear side of the lookalike quagga. So, but it was a remarkable day. Look, you're sitting there, and that's really one of the moments when you say to yourself, you know, there's no place else you would rather be than on a safari or in the breeding stocks with these lookalike quaggas. Really, it was unbelievable. So that's what this is. Genetically, it's a zebra, but in my mind, it's a quagga, which, as I said, it disappeared in the 1870s. I think the last one in the wild disappeared in 1870 something, and then a few years later, the last one died in the Amsterdam Zoo. So if you really want to see the last quagga, if you went to the Natural History Museum in Leiden in the Netherlands, the last real quagga is mounted in that zoo. But these are as close as anybody is, can really get to see. So really a spectacular day spent out there.
And what a great theme of making such a special experience out of an animal that I've been guilty of when I see what I know as zebras and on safaris, and I'm like, oh geez, not another zebra. I've seen so many. See something else, and yet I'm envious of hearing from you.
I think we're the same. The first time I went on safari was the Masai Mara. It was in August of '99. You drive out of the lodge within 10 feet. I yelled stop because there was a zebra there, and then you start taking a picture of it. And by the end of that day, that was during the migration. I don't know how many zebras I saw, tens or hundreds of thousands. And pretty soon you stop taking pictures of them. Even on that trip, the carnivore restaurant in Nairobi had zebra on the menu. I think they've since gotten rid of the real game animals from the menu. But at that time, I think that eland, waterbug, zebra, but I believe they've since removed that from the menu.
It's almost like when I lived in Beijing, I could always tell people on their first visit to the Forbidden City because they're taking so many pictures of the first or second gates and buildings, and there's 10 more coming, and they get bigger and bigger.
The same thing, right? Everything it's new until it's not.
Yeah.
Right. It's the same idea with zebras, I mean, how many people go on safari to take a picture of the wildebeest? Maybe you take the first one or two you see, and after that, you sort of look at
I said with another guest, it's the ones that I can never get tired of are the warthogs, the meerkats, these the scrappy, cute little animals.
Yeah, you're lucky. The warthogs, I don't, I've been on a lot of safaris since then. I haven't spent as much time maybe watching the warthogs as I should have. And meerkat, I've never seen. I've tried up in the Kalahari. I didn't see meerkats when I was up there.
Fantastic. I'll keep on rolling.
Let's see what's next. I forgot.
Yeah.
All right, so this I mentioned Sumatra early on. So this is an animal that's easy to see in the wild. But the reason I posted it, it was easier than I thought. Again, when I first started thinking about animals, the primates were certainly on my list. At least three of them. I always wanted to see a gorilla, mountain gorillas and lowland gorillas. I've only seen mountain gorillas so far. Chimpanzees and orangutans. So when you first start looking into primates, you come across the three females who I'll just nickname the trimates, who had been selected by Louis Leakey, and they were sent to different places to study primates. Jane Goodall went to Gombe National Park to study chimps. I was there last September. Diane Fossey went to the Volcano Massif on the border of the DRC.
I've got to interrupt you then. I've been eyeing Gombe Stream National Park, Western Tanzania, Jane Goodall's base, as you said. I was planning for this September and never got to planning. So
I went to Gombe last September. It's not impossible, but it's a bit tricky. So we could talk about that either now or offline, whatever you want to do. But Gombe. And then the hiking to find the chimps was also a bit of I think it was 7 or 8 hours before we finally found them. They were just ahead of us the whole day, so it's a little bit of luck involved. But anyway, then there was a woman, and I have a hard time recalling her name. She was sent to Borneo to study orangutans. So that's really where I always thought I was going to go look for orangutans. It's in a park in southern Borneo, but it's complicated. You need to hire a boat and sleep on a boat, and it's a multi-day endeavor in a very remote part of a very remote island. So then, as I mentioned earlier, when I was on my way to Christmas Island, I made a small detour and went to Sumatra to see the orangutans. And it's pretty easy. What you do is you fly to a town called Hamadan in northern Sumatra, and it's about a 4-hour drive to a village called Bukit Lawang, which is on the border of a national park, Gunung Leuser National Park, which is part of the the rainforest of Sumatra UNESCO site, and they'll arrange for you to wander around the park and look for orangutans. So it was pretty easy. I spent, I think, 2 or 3 nights there and spent 2 days hiking in the park and saw many orangutans, but mostly juveniles or smaller females. This was the only adult male that we saw when we were there, which, based on what they told me, he was not frequently encountered. He's got the big platters on his face. Really an incredibly impressive animal. And then when you get there, it's a bit sad because the drive from Hamadan to this park, it's all palm tree plantations. The rainforest has really been stripped away, and it's just palm tree plantations for the palm oil trade. It really is as far as you can see. So you get to this little pocket where these orangutans sort of contained, and you're wandering around in there for a couple of days. But so easier than I thought. I'd seen orangutans in Borneo before, but really more like in a sanctuary. These are the first time I saw them in the wild. So if you want to see them in the wild, Sumatra is a pretty easy place to see them.
Yeah, that I had a extra day connection in Kuala Lumpur, and I was able to fly over and visit that spot on a very long day trip and be back by midnight.
To see the orangutans?
Yep, same park you visited. Yeah, the Newer Road when I went a couple years ago, and so it wasn't the 3 or 4 hours you talked about. I think it was more like 2. But
Yeah, I don't know why it was so long when we went, but yeah. So I flew in there from Singapore to Medan, and I
yeah,
flew out to KL.
but
So
it,
I look,
yeah.
it's possible. I guess
I mean, it was
that's
like a
impressive.
5 a.m. flight from KL and an 11 p.m. back, and it was tight. So maybe it was that long, and I'm just forgetting how long it was on the road.
That's impressive as a day trip. I mean, I spent 2 days there at a place called the Jungle, and it was right on the river because you end up being a sweaty mess after spending the day in the jungle. And what they do is you hike through the jungle to find the orangutans, and it's a few mile hike, and you sort of get into the jungle, and they take you out at a point where the sort of the jungle meets the river, and there are inner tubes there. And you sort of jump into an inner tube, so you don't have to hike back. You sort of float down the river on an inner tube back, which really was a great way to end the day. And the river runs right by the hotel, so you take the inner tube down to the hotel, get out, and walk right into the hotel.
Right. And
So
next we
that
have
was really a good.
another handsome animal.
Who is next? Ah, a southern elephant seal. I think it's the biggest, other than a whale or a killer whale. It's the
Yeah.
biggest of the marine mammals. So what was interesting about this is they gather mostly on islands, between the subantarctic region, sort of between Argentina and New Zealand and Australia and Antarctica. And the only place they come ashore or on a continental beach is Peninsula Valdez and the surrounding areas in, I guess, in what's, I guess, technically the Eastern Patagonia in Argentina. So I went down there. It must have been that's when I got chased. I'm not. I think I'm probably not as close as I appear, but closer than I should be in that picture. So I'll come to that in a second. So anyway, I went to Peninsula Valdez, and we try to see elephant seals there. That's the place where, if you've ever seen National Geographic, the killer whales sort of pick seal pups off the beach and eat them. That's
Mm.
where that takes place. There are elephant seals there, but they're very difficult to get close to. Probably I shouldn't be getting as close as I am here, and difficult to take pictures. So I had a very good guide that day, and I was talking to him. He said, there's a place down the coast. It's called Punta Nifas, and it's about an hour and a half south of the town where I stayed when I went to Peninsula Valdez. And he said that there are plenty of elephant seals there. There'll be no one else there. The trick is, we're going to park on top of a cliff. It's maybe 200 or 300 feet down a cliff before you get to the gravel beach where the harems of elephant seals are. So it sounded like a good day. So we drove down there through these estancias, get to the cliff, climb down, and as he said, on the beach there were harems, groups of elephant seals, one large male here, and he would usually be accompanied by, I don't know, 8, 10, 12 females and a bunch of juveniles. And the beach was several miles long, and all along the beach there were these groups of elephant seals. So this was sort of at the end of the day when the guide was sort of up near the cliffs, ready to climb back up. And I decided to take a diagonal route to him instead of probably staying further away from the elephant seal. And I sort of broke an invisible line demarcating this guy's comfort zone. And I think it was a mock charge, is what my guide told me later on. The elephant seal sort of jumped, and then I just ran to get sort of scramble up the cliff because I knew he couldn't climb the cliff. But it's 20. The thing is 20 feet long, and I think almost 4 tons. So it would pancake you if it caught you. But really unbelievable. And then when we would climb back up the cliff, you sort of look down, and what you can't see around the beach is the killer whales sort of patrolling the coast, looking to pick a baby seal off the beach. Now we didn't see that. But we saw killer whales maybe a half an hour or so. We stayed with them, just watching them cruise up and down the coastline, looking for a small seal that may be strayed too close to the water that they could pluck off the beach and toss around and kill them and eat. So really, this is, if you want to see elephant seals in the wild, really this place, Punta Ninfas, about an hour and a half south of Peninsula Valdez, is the place to go. You can see them in California too. It's a different species of elephant seal. I haven't been there, and my guess, if it's the U.S., they're not going to let you get anywhere near as close as you can get in Argentina. Here, you get as close as you wanted to,
Or closer.
or
Well, we'll move
closer, right?
to an
Until
animal that really would pancake you if it was still around.
yeah, until you want to until you get too close. Let's see what I have next. I don't remember what's next.
You've got
So this is
the mammoth.
an extinct extinct animal. So this was in July 1997. I flew from Vladivostok to Yakutsk, and I wanted to go to Yakutsk for a lot of reasons, but one of them was because I wanted to visit their mammoth museum, because the mammoth museum in Yakutsk has the world's best preserved mammal. You know, pieces, skin, hide, meat of the mammoth. So while I was on the plane, I started talking to the guy sitting next to me. He was an American math professor who spent part of the year teaching at the university in Yakutsk. And when I told him what I was going to, he said, you know, come by tomorrow and I'll call the museum up and I'll tell them that you're a big shot from the US, a math professor from the US, and that they should give you a private behind the scenes tour of the museum. So I went next day, I met up with him. He made whatever calls were necessary. And I got a tour of the regular part of the museum with other folks. I had gone over to the museum with his students who had never been to the museum. And then at the end of the tour, he excused everybody else and he asked me if I wanted to go into the cryogenic storage room to see the mammoth. So that's what this is. That's the leg of a mammoth. I mean, they basically keep it in a hefty bed. That's the leg of a mammoth that was found frozen in the tundra. I think its trunk had been sticking out a little bit, so maybe some wolves or some other predator had eaten a bit of the trunk and eaten a bit of one of the legs. But they have legs, the trunk, the tusks, and that's really just a frozen mammoth that they plucked out of the tundra, which I think is probably getting easier and easier. I mean, I'm sure you saw that Siberia had temperatures upwards of 100 degrees recently, and as hot as it gets, the tundra starts to melt, and they're finding bits of mammoth, you know, every year, tusks and other things. So this may not remain the world's best preserved mammoth for long. They may find other ones, but just the idea that they were going to let me, I have no scientific background whatsoever, but the fact that they're going to let me wander around the vault and then pick these things up. And then when we left, they brought me into a storage room and said, you know, you basically take whatever you want. Now, I didn't want anything. I couldn't leave empty-handed, so I left with a woolly rhino molar. I don't even know where it is, but it's a giant tooth of a woolly rhino. I mean, they wanted to give me big pieces. I didn't even think I could take this stuff back to the U.S. So that's what they gave me. I didn't really want to insult them.
This is like those Omaha Steaks boxes.
Exactly. You could probably defrost that thing and maybe eat it. I don't even know. But yeah, that's a real mammoth leg. I mean, I'm not aware of anyone else having held a real mammoth. And you can see them. There are certainly museums in Russia, in St. Petersburg. The zoology museum is as good as the zoology museum gets. And they have 4 mammoths on display there, you know, an adult and 3 juveniles, but you can't touch them. I think they're just taxidermied or maybe dried out, but you certainly can't touch them. So that's the mammoth. That's the extinct mammal I alluded to.
Now we'll go very much alive and very small, and one that I totally missed when I visited this destination.
Who's next? I forgot. You're going to click.
Well, right? Island is a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
All right, so that's, click on the next picture. Maybe it's easy to see. All right, you're going to advance one more.
One more is an island.
Oh, is it? I thought the next. Oh, no, there it is. Yeah, that's all right. Keep it there for a second. So this island is Lord Howe. It is a UNESCO site, and really the reason I wanted to go there was to see this insect. This really is the insect with the world's greatest backstory. So this is the Lord Howe Island stick insect. So I'll give you a little bit of a background on this. These bugs were once so common on Lord Howe that basically people used them as fishing bait. They were called tree lobsters. They were everywhere on Lord Howe. In 1918 or so, a supply ship, you know, crashed into a reef, and like a lot of places around the world, when supply ships become shipwrecked, rats escape. So rats jumped off the shipwreck, ran onto Lord Howe Island, and in the space of 2 years, ate every single Lord Howe Island stick insect to the point where they were declared extinct in 1920. There was none left, 0 left. So in the early part of this century, there's a when you fly into Lord Howe, and you can show the next picture, there's a pyramid-shaped seamount off the coast of Lord Howe called Ball's Pyramid. So if you sit on the right side of the plane, you'll see this rock. It's, I don't know, maybe a few miles from Lord Howe Island. Mm-hmm. And some Australian naturalists had the idea of scaling it to see if any of these stick insects had managed to survive over decades, sort of clinging to this rock. So they climbed up in the day, in I think 2001 or so, and they found, sort of some dried bits and pieces of insects and maybe some droppings, but they didn't see anything. They decided to return at night, and they scaled this pyramid, which is much taller than it seems, and they found 24 of these stick insects up there in 2001. So that's 80 years after they had been declared extinct. And then they left them there, and in 2003 they returned to this pyramid, climbed back up, and removed 2 breeding pairs. They took the 2 breeding pairs and they brought them to a guy in Sydney. They gave him a pair, and those 2 died. And then they gave 2 to the Melbourne Zoo, who had a lot of success, and as we bred them to the point where now I think there are tens of thousands of these. So they call them sort of a Lazarus species, something that came back from the dead. So I wanted to go and see them. No, there are no more wandering around Lord Howe, but I went to the museum, and they have them there sort of in aquarium tanks. And I asked the docent if I can hold one. And I really thought she was going to say, out of your mind, it's one of the world's rarest insects. We don't let anybody touch it. But she seemed unfazed, and she opened the cage up and took out this stick insect and put it in my hand. And then they called somebody else over to take photos, and I got to spend as much time with it. So I really, at one time, this animal was thought to be extinct for 80 years. Then they found it. There's a few of those they find around the world that disappear for years and years and years, and then are finally found again. So I guess in this case,
is there a plan to repopulate them on Lord Howe, or are they the predators? Or
no. So what they've been doing is spraying some kind of poisons to eradicate the rats, and cats and other and mongooses and other invasive species. But what that's done is it also has had an impact on some of the island's rare birds. So what they've done recently is they've gathered up a lot of the birds, put them into sort of an enclosure, and they're spraying the island to sort of remove all the invasive species. And the plan is to return them to Lord Howe Island and get rid of the rats and the stoats and the weasels and the mongooses and everything else that eats these things, and eventually return them to the wild. There are plenty now. There are plenty. So hopefully they're able to do it. I think eradicating those invasive species is a lot more difficult than it seems. Especially you've been to Lord Howe. It's not that small a place.
Yeah.
So there's going to be some challenges. These rats can hide anywhere. So hopefully, they'll be successful and they'll be able to return them in the not too distant.
Now, Lord Howe is well known and within its neighborhood, so to speak, but not particularly well known in much of the world, other than the country collector type people. So does it? Your experience, does it justify the reputation of this incredible natural experience?
I would say yes. There's a lot of folks that rank it as the world's nicest island. To me, it's not as nice as the other island in sort of what's in the neighborhood, Norfolk Island, which I would say to me is more attractive and more interesting. Lord Howe had never had a historic population, so there aren't any historic buildings. Whereas Norfolk has had a tremendous amount of history going back to Pitcairn Island days and others that have spent time on that island. But yeah, Lord Howe is a very pretty island. It's a bit exclusive. At least when I visited, they had a mandatory 3-night hotel stay. You couldn't go in and out for a day. They're trying to limit visitors. There are not that many hotels, not that many restaurants. So it's like maybe Fernando de Noronha. They want visitors, but not that many of them. But yeah, look, if you're in Sydney or Brisbane, there are probably daily flights or there were before this whole situation, but there were daily flights from Brisbane and Sydney, so you can go there for 3 days as a side trip from those two easily, and then go to Norfolk also. Yeah, definitely worth it. I would go back again.
All right.
So who is next? All right, so this is a very special monkey. It's the gelada, which, and hold on here for a while. It lives in the highlands of Ethiopia. So really, what's interesting about this guy, I don't know if you're familiar with the infinite monkey theory. You ever spend too much time talking to your friends about that?
Is that like banging out Shakespeare?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. You know, an infinite number of immortal monkeys typing away forever would eventually, produce the entire works of Shakespeare. So that was what I thought when I saw these. There were thousands of these monkeys around, all sitting down, looking like they're hunched over a keyboard. So these live in the highlands of Ethiopia, and what's special about them is they occupy the niche that in other places are occupied by grazers. Cows or antelopes or whatever type of grazers. There is a grazer in this highlands, an ibex, but very, very few. So these monkeys are basically grass eaters, and they spend the day, patrolling the grasslands, eating grass, and they are completely indifferent to people. This guy, he's yawning, not making it's not threatening. I was maybe 10, 15, 20 feet from him. And as you sat there, you went down, there was a herd. I started off by sitting down maybe 100 meters away from them. And over time, they sort of surround you. There were hundreds of them. Really, it's a beautiful monkey. Some people call it a gelada baboon. I'm not sure it's technically a baboon, but that's probably the size. And they live in small troops. And they come up sort of the Simeon Highlands are above an escarpment. So during the day, they come and they graze. And in the evening, they sort of scamper down and they sleep on the cliffs. But really, an incredible monkey up in the Simeon Highlands, and pretty also easy to book. What I did to get here is I reached out to the Simeon Lodge directly, which is bills itself as Africa's highest lodge, and they set up. I flew to Gondar. They had a truck meet me, drove me up here. Spent a couple of days looking for the geladas, and then drove me back to Gondar. But really really magnificent place. And to spend, we spent a couple of days with them. The monkeys, as I said, the monkeys were indifferent to people. There was nobody there other than me and the guide.
Really?
Other tourists in the park, but everyone was pretty spread out.
Wow, incredible.
But he's
in Ethiopia has been very much on my not just return once, but return multiple times list. I've only been, other than more transits than I can count, I've only had one proper visit, and not seen nearly enough in that time.
Yeah, I think I've done 2.5 proper visits. The first one was sort of the northern circuit, Gondar, Simeons, Lalibela, and Addis, and then the other real good trip I did was sort of the Yomo Valley, which I went a couple of years ago. You and I are connected on Facebook, so you probably saw those pictures.
Yeah,
and you get to meet the people that are down there, so that was real interesting. Then
I had a couple of there because I could only fit in that or Axum, and I picked Axum, and I was not. I didn't like it more than the few hours I spent there.
Well, then you're not going to like Gondar, because I've been to both. So my third trip was I made a day trip to Axum. Axum with the Stele Field is Gondar has a castle. I wasn't that impressed with Gondar, to tell you the truth.
Lalibela was great.
Lalibela, really the three best sites that I've been to in Ethiopia are Lalibela, to see the hyenas in Harar, and then to go to the Omo Valley. Those really are, any ranking of the world's best sites, those three would be, nestled near the top. Gondar and Axum, they're interesting. I wouldn't make a special trip around them. If I was going, I was glad I spent time there. You get to look for the Ark of the Covenant when you're in Axum, and Gondar is okay. But I wouldn't go back only to go to Gondar. If I were to go for a second time, I would try to get down to the Omo Valley, which is also much easier than it had been, because they opened up an airport in Jinka in southern Ethiopia, which is near the Omo Valley. Before that, you had to drive, 8-10 hours to get down there. Now you can fly to Jinka, and you're basically there. So.
And now we reach the climax. This innocuous bird.
So this is a bird. It's a pigeon. But really, this was the reason I went to Mauritius. And I'm not a bird person at all. But this is a pink pigeon. So really, what's really special about this is how rare it once was and how it was brought back. So for years before people had reached the Mascarene Islands, Mauritius, Reunion, Rodriguez, there were pigeons. There were pink pigeons, blue pigeons, and the dodo, of course, which everybody knows. But since people arrived, every pigeon on those 3 islands has gone extinct, except for this pigeon, the pink pigeon. But its numbers had been reduced to 10 in Mauritius by the early 1990s. 10 in the world.
Hmm.
I don't know if you've heard about Gerald Durrell. Gerald Durrell is really one of the world's great conservationists. He's been to Jersey. The Jersey Zoo had been known as the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Center or something like that. So he really is instrumental in rescuing a lot of animals, especially island animals that are risk going extinct. So in the early 1990s, he worked to sort of gather up some of these pink pigeons and bring them back to Jersey or wherever he brought them to, and sort of breed them to the point where they're able to be released back into the wild. So there is a national park in Mauritius, Black Gorge National Park, I think it's called, and there are hundreds of pink pigeons now in that park. Remember, there were 10, now there are 400 or 500 in that park, but that park is pretty big, and so they're difficult to see. So when I went to Mauritius, I stayed in the town called, I think it's Marburg, on the east coast because it's walking distance of a small island off the eastern coast of Mauritius called Île-aux-Aigrettes. And what's special about Île-aux-Aigrettes is, naturalists have taken the time to remove all the invasive plants and invasive species and have reintroduced rare birds to this small island, including pink pigeons. So you take a boat from the port over there. I don't know how long it was. It was probably 15 to 20 minutes to get there. And again, there was nobody on the boat but me and the folks that ran the park. It's not the type of place that seems to attract many tourists that go to Mauritius. I think people go there probably to spend more time on the beach and doing other things. But really, I wanted to see these pink pigeons. So you walk around through the underbrush, and we came to a clearing, and sitting in a tree, this is it, the pink pigeon. So, Mauritius has a lot of wonderful things, 2 UNESCO sites, a great postage museum, a great natural history museum with probably one of the world's best preserved dodo skeletons. But this small island off the east coast has these pink pigeons, and this is the only one I saw. I think there are a handful on the island, but even with a handful, it's probably the best place in the world if you want to see the only living pigeons that have lived on those 3 islands. Dodos, pink pigeons. There were different pigeons on Reunion. There were pigeons on Rodriguez. They're all gone. This is it.
So did this pigeon recognize you as a New Yorker?
He is much nicer than our pigeons. But I don't know if you followed ever or read any books on the passenger pigeon. That was really that was really at one time the most common bird in the United States. I think in the 1850s or 60s there were 3 billion passenger pigeons flying around the United States, representing a third to 40% of every bird in the U.S. And it was the most populous bird in the world at that time. And now they're all gone. So pigeons are fragile. Somehow they shot out of the sky and deforested and got rid of the fields where the pigeons were eating different things, and they got rid of every passenger pigeon in the world. So, as I said, pigeons can even though they're numerous, and even the ones in New York, they could go extinct. So these guys are. It was a very interesting bird. Definitely worth the trip. Mauritius obviously has a lot to see, and is a wonderful destination, for things unrelated to looking for pigeons. But as far as pigeons go, this was a pretty good one.
Yeah, Mauritius is one that I really enjoyed Rodrigues, but when I was on Mauritius, it was the end of a trip. I was very exhausted. I do not do well in the heat, and I really did not give Mauritius do Mauritius justice. So it's one I will.
Maybe you could pop back up now, so I'm not looking at the pigeon. But yeah, no, Mauritius. There's a lot to see. I spent most of my time in the southern end. As I said, I went to the capital, which has at least 2 really world-class museums. The southern coast has waterfalls and colored earth, and also there's a small zoo on the very southern tip of Mauritius that really has an unbelievable insect collection and a lot of other things. So yeah, Mauritius, there's quite a bit to see. The UNESCO sites are a bit underwhelming for someone who doesn't really know a lot about Mauritian history, like me, but the natural sites really are incredible.
All right. Well, I'm a big Spinal Tap fan, so it has to go up to 11. I'll put you on the spot. Best place to see Homo sapiens?
Omo Valley, we talked about it already, but really the people there, if you're able to arrange a good trip. So what I did when I went there is I contacted a very good guide and I told him that I really wanted to avoid crowds. I didn't want to be visiting, the local people with a lot of other tourists.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also the Omo Valley. Supposedly, the people there, the local people, will charge you by click every picture that you take. I didn't want to do that. So what I told my guys, let's figure out a way to sort of find the chief when we get to these villages and pay the guy, more than whatever they would get per click,
Mm-hmm.
but give me free reign to take as many pictures as I want. So that's what we did. We would get to these villages, and we went early, very early in the morning, and spent time with the Mercy and the Hama, and I think we spent time with 4 or 5 tribes in the Omo Valley. The people were extremely welcoming, very nice. It's a little unsettling because there is a bit of an aspect where you walk around taking pictures of people and they're not doing what they would otherwise be doing. But
Mm-hmm.
you go early in a small group, maybe you could spend a little more time talking to them about their life, and they had a lot of questions for me about New York and the United States and things like that. So I don't know, is it the best place? It's among the best places, I would say. Really, that is worth the trip.
All right, and we'll close. Best spot for views in New York. You determine view of what?
Best view in New York, I would say go to Brooklyn. There's a new hotel in Brooklyn, the William Vale. If you go up there, you get an unbelievable panoramic view of Manhattan. Now, I haven't left Manhattan, or I have not been more than 2 or 3 blocks from my apartment since early March, so I don't intend to get out there soon. But really, if you really want to see Manhattan, that's a particularly good place to go. You got to be far away to see Manhattan. Once you're among the buildings, you don't really get to appreciate the skyline.
That's when I lived in Newport, Jersey City. My stock line was I'd rather be living in Jersey looking at New York than the
The other way
reverse.
around, right? Yeah, no, that's right. Like from Jersey, from Brooklyn, you get really spectacular views. With the Staten Island Ferry, you get a good view. So those views, one day we'll be out and about and we'll get to see those views again. But for the time being, I am sticking close to home. That's one of the reasons I wanted to thank you, for doing these every night, to sort of maintain a sense of travel community, which is really missing from a lot of folks' lives like myself. And I know there are people out there braver than I am that are traveling, but sort of hunkered down and sticking close to home. So really wanted to thank you, for spending time talking to me, but even more importantly, speaking with other very interesting people where I can, pay attention to what they're talking about and learn a little bit, and also maintain a sense of travel community in a time when very few people are traveling. So I wanted to thank you and also suggest maybe you could figure out a way to interview yourself, because that would be interesting also to hear, your background than what you've done, because you're as well traveled as anybody. And you've been to more countries than I have, and I don't have many more to go. So it'd be nice if you could figure out a way to interview yourself one of these days.
Oh, thank you for those comments. Actually, a few weeks back, interviewing Zach George, one of my friends out of Brisbane, one of the commenters immediately, because we were just chatting back and forth, and immediately sent me a message, dude, let the kid talk. And I tried to keep relatively quiet ever since that dude message.
You did a very nice job. Yeah. Look, for me, it's very difficult to get anybody to talk to me for an hour about travel. So I really appreciate the fact that
sure.
to sit through this, because nobody really wants to look at pictures. Nobody wants to hear. I mean, maybe for 2 or 3 minutes, but after that, everyone other than you loses interest. So I really appreciate you're taking the hour plus time to spend with me on a Monday night, and I'll look forward to catching up on and watching the rest interviews for the rest of the week.
Well, thank you, and I've shared the full collection of your galleries, and I would commend two of the highlights popping out to me are Liberia and Madeira. So check out Michael's Smug Mug galleries of so many travels, wonderful pictures, and thank you for joining us tonight, Michael.
Thanks, Devin. See you soon.